Kohlberg's Stages of Moral Development. An outstanding example of research in the Piagetian tradition is the work of Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg has focused on moral development and has proposed a stage theory of moral thinking which goes well beyond Piaget's initial formulations. Kohlberg, who was born in 1927, grew up in Bronxville, New York, and attended the Andover Academy in Massachusetts, a private high school for bright and usually wealthy students. He did not go immediately to college, but instead went to help the Israeli cause, in which he was made the second engineer on an old freighter carrying refugees from parts of Europe to Israel. After this, in 1948, he enrolled at the University of Chicago, where he scored so high on admission tests that he had to take only a few courses to earn his bachelor's degree. This he did in 1 year. He stayed on at Chicago for graduate work in psychology, at first thinking he would become a clinical psychologist. However, he soon became interested in Piaget and began interviewing children and adolescents on moral issues. The result was his doctoral dissertation, 1958A, the first rendition of his new stage theory. Kohlberg's 1958A core sample was comprised of 72 boys from both middle and lower class families in Chicago. They were ages 10, 13, and 16. He later added to his sample younger children, delinquents, and boys and girls from other American cities and from other countries. The basic interview consists of a series of dilemmas such as the following. Heinz steals the drug. In Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." So Heinz got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Should the husband have done that? Kohlberg is not really interested in whether the subject says yes or no to this dilemma, but in the reasoning behind the answer. The interviewer wants to know why the subject thinks Heinz should or should not have stolen the drug. The interview schedule then asks new questions which help one understand the child's reasoning. For example, children are asked if Heinz had a right to steal the drug, if he was violating the druggist's rights, and what sentence the judge should give him once he was caught. Once again, the main concern is with the reasoning behind the answers. The interview then goes on to give more dilemmas in order to get a good sampling of a subject's moral thinking. Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. Level 1. Preconventional morality. Stage 1. Obedience and punishment orientation. Kohlberg's stage 1 is similar to Piaget's first stage of moral thought. The child assumes that powerful authorities hand down a fixed set of rules which he or she must unquestioningly obey. To the Heinz Dilemma, the child typically says that Heinz was wrong to steal the drug because it's against the law, or it's bad to steal, as if this were all there were to it. When asked to elaborate, the child usually responds in terms of the consequences involved, explaining that stealing is bad because you'll get punished. Although the vast majority of children at stage 1 oppose Heinz's theft, it is still possible for a child to support the action and still employ stage 1 reasoning. For example, a child might say, Heinz can steal it because he asked first, and it's not like he stole something big, he won't get punished. Even though the child agrees with Heinz's action, the reasoning is still stage 1. The concern is with what authorities permit and punish. Kohlberg calls stage 1 thinking preconventional because children do not yet speak as members of society. Instead, they see morality as something external to themselves, as that which the big people say they must do. Stage 2. Individualism and exchange. At this stage, children recognize that there is not just one right view that is handed down by the authorities. Different individuals have different viewpoints. Heinz, they might point out, might think it's right to take the drug, the druggist would not. Since everything is relative, each person is free to pursue his or her individual interests. One boy said that Heinz might steal the drug if he wanted his wife to live, but that he doesn't have to if he wants to marry someone younger and better looking. Another boy said Heinz might steal it because maybe they had children and he might need someone at home to look after them. But maybe he shouldn't steal it because they might put him in prison for more years than he could stand. What is right for Heinz then is what meets his own self-interest. You might have noticed that children at both stages 1 and 2 talk about punishment. However, they perceive it differently. At stage 1, punishment is tied up in the child's mind with wrongness. Punishment proves that disobedience is wrong. At stage 2, in contrast, punishment is simply a risk that one naturally wants to avoid. Although stage 2 respondents sometimes sound immoral, they do have some sense of right action. This is a notion of fair exchange or fair deals. The philosophy is one of returning favors. If you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. To the Heinz story, subjects often say that Heinz was right to steal the drug because the druggist was unwilling to make a fair deal. He was trying to rip Heinz off. Or they might say that he should steal for his wife because she might return the favor someday. Respondents at stage 2 are still said to reason at the preconventional level because they speak as isolated individuals rather than as members of society. They see individuals exchanging favors, but there is still no identification with the values of the family or community. Level 2. Conventional morality. Stage 3. Good interpersonal relationships. At this stage, children, who are by now usually entering their teens, see morality as more than simple deals. They believe that people should live up to the expectations of the family and community and behave in good ways. Good behavior means having good motives and interpersonal feelings such as love, empathy, trust, and concern for others. Heinz, they typically argue, was right to steal the drug because he was a good man for wanting to save her, and his intentions were good, that of saving the life of someone he loves. Even if Heinz doesn't love his wife, these subjects often say he should steal the drug because I don't think any husband should sit back and watch his wife die. If Heinz's motives were good, the druggists were bad. The druggist, stage 3 subjects emphasized, was selfish, greedy, and only interested in himself, not another life. Sometimes the respondents become so angry with the druggist that they say that he ought to be put in jail. A typical stage 3 response is that of Don, age 13. It was really the druggist's fault. He was unfair, trying to overcharge and letting someone die. Heinz loved his wife and wanted to save her. I think anyone would. I don't think they would put him in jail. The judge would look at all sides and see that the druggist was charging too much. We see that Don defines the issue in terms of the actor's character traits and motives. He talks about the loving husband, the unfair druggist, and the understanding judge. His answer deserves the label conventional morality because it assumes that the attitude expressed would be shared by the entire community. Anyone would be right to do what Heinz did. As mentioned earlier, there are similarities between Kohlberg's first 3 stages and Piaget's 2 stages. In both sequences, there is a shift from unquestioning obedience to a relativistic outlook and to a concern for good motives. For Kohlberg, however, these shifts occur in 3 stages rather than 2. Stage 4. Maintaining the social order. Stage 3 reasoning works best in 2-person relationships with family members or close friends, where one can make a real effort to get to know the other's feelings and needs and try to help. At stage 4, in contrast, the respondent becomes more broadly concerned with society as a whole. Now the emphasis is on obeying laws, respecting authority, and performing one's duties so that the social order is maintained. In response to the Heinz story, many subjects say they understand that Heinz's motives were good, but they cannot condone the theft. What would happen if we all started breaking the laws whenever we felt we had a good reason? The result would be chaos. Society couldn't function, as one subject explained. I don't want to sound like Spiro Agnew, Law and Order, and wave the flag, but if everybody did as he wanted to do, set up his own beliefs as to right and wrong, then I think you would have chaos. The only thing I think we have in civilization nowadays is some sort of legal structure which people are sort of bound to follow. Society needs a centralizing framework. Because stage 4 subjects make moral decisions from the perspective of society as a whole, they think from a full-fledged member of society perspective. You will recall that stage 1 children also generally oppose stealing because it breaks the law. Superficially, stage 1 and stage 4 subjects are giving the same response. So we see here why Kohlberg insists that we must probe into the reasoning behind the overt response. Stage 1 children say, it's wrong to steal and it's against the law, but they cannot elaborate any further, except to say that stealing can get a person jailed. Stage 4 respondents, in contrast, have a conception of the function of laws for society as a whole, a conception which far exceeds the grasp of the younger child. Level 3. Postconventional morality. Stage 5. Social contract and individual rights. At stage 4, people want to keep society functioning. However, a smoothly functioning society is not necessarily a good one. A totalitarian society might be well organized, but it is hardly the moral ideal. At stage 5, people begin to ask what makes for a good society. They begin to think about society in a very theoretical way, stepping back from their own society and considering the rights and values that a society ought to uphold. They then evaluate existing societies in terms of these prior considerations. They are said to take a prior-to-society perspective. Stage 5 respondents basically believe that a good society is best conceived as a social contract into which people freely enter to work toward the benefit of. All they recognize that different social groups within a society will have different values, but they believe that all rational people would agree on 2 points. First, they would all want certain basic rights, such as liberty and life, to be protected. Second, they would want some democratic procedures for changing unfair law and for improving society. In response to the Heinz Dilemma, Stage 5 respondents make it clear that they do not generally favor breaking laws. Laws are social contracts that we agree to uphold until we can change them by democratic means. Nevertheless, the wife's right to live is a moral right that must be protected. Thus, Stage 5 respondents sometimes defend Heinz's theft in strong language. It is the husband's duty to save his wife. The fact that her life is in danger transcends every other standard you might use to judge his action. Life is more important than property. This young man went on to say that, from a moral standpoint, Heinz should save the life of even a stranger, since to be consistent, the value of a life means any life. When asked if the judge should punish Heinz, he replied, "Usually, the moral and legal standpoints coincide. Here they conflict. The judge should weight the moral standpoint more heavily, but preserve the legal law in punishing Heinz lightly." Stage 5 subjects then talk about morality and rights that take some priority over particular laws. Kohlberg insists, however, that we do not judge people to be at stage 5 merely from their verbal labels. We need to look at their social perspective and mode of reasoning. At stage 4 too, subjects frequently talk about the right to life. But for them, this right is legitimized by the authority of their social or religious group, e.g., by the Bible. Presumably, if their group valued property over life, they would too. At stage 5, in contrast, people are making more of an independent effort to think out what any society ought to value. They often reason, for example, that property has little meaning without life. They are trying to determine logically what a society ought to be like. Stage 6, universal principles. Stage 5 respondents are working toward a conception of the good society. They suggest that we need to A, protect certain individual rights, and B, settle disputes through democratic processes. However, democratic processes alone do not always result in outcomes that we intuitively sense are just. A majority, for example, may vote for a law that hinders a minority. Thus, Kohlberg believes that there must be a higher stage, Stage 6, which defines the principles by which we achieve justice. Kohlberg's conception of justice follows that of the philosophers Kant and Rawls, as well as great moral leaders such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King. According to these people, the principles of justice require us to treat the claims of all parties in an impartial manner, respecting the basic dignity of all people as individuals. The principles of justice are therefore universal. They apply to all. Thus, for example, we would not vote for a law that aids some people but hurts others. The principles of justice guide us toward decisions based on an equal respect for all. In actual practice, Kohlberg says, we can reach just decisions by looking at a situation through one another's eyes. In the Heinz Dilemma, this would mean that all parties, the druggist, Heinz, and his wife, take the roles of the others. To do this in an impartial manner, people can assume a veil of ignorance. Rawls, 1971, acting as if they do not know which role they will eventually occupy. If the druggist did this, even he would recognize that life must take priority over property, for he wouldn't want to risk finding himself in the wife's shoes with property valued over life. Thus, they would all agree that the wife must be saved. This would be the fair solution. Such a solution, we must note, requires not only impartiality, but the principle that everyone is given full and equal respect. If the wife were considered of less value than the others, a just solution could not be reached. Until recently, Kohlberg had been scoring some of his subjects at stage 6, but he has temporarily stopped doing so. For one thing, he and other researchers had not been finding subjects who consistently reasoned at this stage. Also, Kohlberg has concluded that his interview dilemmas are not useful for distinguishing between stage 5 and stage 6 thinking. He believes that stage 6 has a clearer and broader conception of universal principles, which include justice as well as individual rights, but feels that his interview fails to draw out this broader understanding. Consequently, he has temporarily dropped stage 6 from his scoring manual, calling it a theoretical stage and scoring all postconventional responses as stage 5. Theoretically, one issue that distinguishes stage 5 from stage 6 is civil disobedience. Stage 5 would be more hesitant to endorse civil disobedience because of its commitment to the social contract and to changing laws through democratic agreements. Only when an individual right is clearly at stake does violating the law seem justified. At stage 6, in contrast, a commitment to justice makes the rationale for civil disobedience stronger and broader. Martin Luther King, for example, argued that laws are only valid insofar as they are grounded in justice, and that a commitment to justice carries with it an obligation to disobey unjust laws. King also recognized, of course, the general need for laws in democratic processes, stages 4 and 5, and he was therefore willing to accept the penalties for his actions. Nevertheless, he believed that the higher principle of justice required civil disobedience. Summary. At stage 1, children think of what is right as that which authority says is right. Doing the right thing is obeying authority and avoiding punishment. At stage 2, children are no longer so impressed by any single authority. They see that there are different sides to any issue. Since everything is relative, one is free to pursue one's own interests, although it is often useful to make deals and exchange favors with others. At stages 3 and 4, young people think as members of the conventional society, with its values, norms, and expectations. At stage 3, they emphasize being a good person, which basically means having helpful motives toward people close to one. At stage 4, the concern shifts toward obeying laws to maintain society as a whole. At stages 5 and 6, people are less concerned with maintaining society for its own sake, and more concerned with the principles and values that make for a good society. At stage 5, they emphasize basic rights and the democratic processes that give everyone a say. And at stage 6, they define the principles by which agreement will be most just.